Hello and welcome to the 50 Shades of Gender podcast. We get curious about all things gender, sex, and sexuality, as well as relationships, feminism, the inclusive kind, mental health and kink, and all that makes us humans unique and diverse. From body positivity to body dysmorphia, it's all welcome here. Come with us on a journey of inclusion, acceptance, and respect. I'm your host, Esther Lemons. I identify as a cisgender woman, and my pronouns are she and her. In this episode, I have a conversation with CHARLIZE Jamieson. CHARLIZE's pronouns are she and her, and she's a transgender woman. Find out what that means to CHARLIZE in this episode. We also talk about the importance of community and local connections, owning who you are, society's obsession with looks, that it's never too late to be brave, how your path is unique rather than right or wrong, and that people don't need to change their minds to have a change of heart. It was recorded on the 20th of May 2021. Now let's get into the episode. Hello and welcome. What's your name?
Hello, my name's CHARLIZE Jamieson.
Hello, CHARLIZE. And I've been asking, how do you identify? But I don't know if that's a language you use. How do you normally talk about your gender? Is that, do you use the term?
I identify as a woman, and so I use she, her, and hers pronouns, and that's it. It's pretty simple.
It is pretty simple, really, isn't it? Yeah, I have your bio that you sent me, and you said you've always known something was different about you, and you said from the age of 13. So what happened when you were 13?
I started noticing things like television ads and magazine advertisements, and maybe for your listeners' benefit, when I was 13, we're talking about the late 60s, 1960s. So things were quite a bit different from a societal standpoint and what was considered norms. And I just knew that how I felt didn't necessarily identify at all with what I was seeing in advertisements for young boys. I didn't necessarily have the same interests as my neighborhood kids, the boys in my neighborhood. But I also knew that my parents were very conservative politically and follow a path, right? There's a narrow path in life. You follow it. You don't venture off that path. And that was their way. And so I just knew that if I were to tell them that, I just knew they wouldn't react well to it. And I did know that, I'd be looking at psychiatric type appointments and possibly even institutionalized. And I was adopted, and I was even afraid that they might want to adopt me. So there's a whole lot of self-preservation, and they loved me. I don't want to give the impression they didn't, but they loved having a son. They loved having their boy, and they wouldn't have loved if I would have upset that apple cart. So I didn't,
Yeah.
and I didn't for 50 years. So
Wow.
we have a ways to go to cover all that ground. But
Yeah, absolutely.
it was, boys, it was cowboys. It was rifles. It was, sports. And I do like sports. And I competed in high school, and I held my own. I was track and cross country, and I was competitive, better than average. So, I could keep up, but I just felt differently inside. It's hard to describe.
Yeah, because I guess you didn't have the language for it at the time.
No,
there wasn't.
No.
Yeah.
No, the language would be very detrimental. The weird or freak or those would have been the words. And so I just kept quiet.
Yeah. So as you sort of continued with your life, and you said you've been married twice, so this is your second marriage you're in. How did maybe you're in a struggle about your identity? How did that affect your relationships?
Well, my first marriage, that aspect really didn't affect it directly. She never knew. And my first wife and I have since had about a 3-hour marathon conversation because she needed some closure. But the entire 21 years that we were married, she had not an inkling. And of course, there's aspects of this that I'm not proud of either. But keep in mind that at this stage of my life, and when I got married, I was in my early 20s the first time, I was in take it to the grave mode. This was just not something that was going to surface. I was going to keep it to myself. and it'll go with me to the grave.
Mm.
And the first 21 years of our marriage, I didn't mention it. And I kept it to myself, kept it from her.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I allowed her to walk down the aisle to marry me. And I knew full well by then that I was really identifying as a woman, but presenting as a man. So it was really a double life struggle inside on that.
Wow.
And my second wife and I now have been married 22 years.
Wow.
I'm kind of giving away my age here a little bit, but we've been married 22 years. I came out to her about 5 or 6 years ago, and it was a difficult conversation. But she's still with me, and
that's really great. I mean, what made you decide to tell her when you did?
Well, the trigger for me coming out was my father's passing. He passed away in 2014, and my mother had passed several years before, 2003. And you know, it was a case of I'm now retired, and I was out of work at that time because my job had my career job that I'd been working at for so long was outsourced overseas. And at 58, I was unemployed. And then my father got terminally ill. And, you know, there was a whole sequence of events, none of them good, that happened in that 2014 year. And we ended up selling our house in Chicago, where we had been living, or I'd been living for about 20 years. And we moved back to Muncie, Indiana, where my hometown was and where my father was. And he passed away on moving day. So it was just more terribleness of 2014. But when he passed, you know, I really thought, what's holding me back at this point? I need to deal with my family. They deserve to know. And I just, you know, I have only so much time left, right? And I've let so much time go. So I decided, you know, now's the time. And so I told my wife, you know, I don't get to make all the big decisions in this family, and I just made a pretty big one. And I kind of pointed to the door and I said, you know, if you feel as though you can't do this and that you need to leave and start fresh, I'll totally understand. No animosity, nothing bad. I'd hope she wouldn't, and she didn't. So she's still here. This, like I say, 5, 6 years later, and we have a daughter still at home who's 22 years old today, and she's high functioning, special needs, and she is our world. And my wife and I love each other, and we're committed to providing her with the safety and security that she needs. Beautiful. So that's kind of how we arrived from there to here, with a whole lot of other stuff in between. So.
Yeah, in a nutshell, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what's it like where you live or in your state? What is the situation there with regards to, you know, LGBT and trans people?
Well, interesting question. Indiana is, from a political standpoint and probably a religious standpoint, because it's very much part of what we call here in the States, the Bible Belt. But Indiana is a very conservative state, and it's a traditional state, traditional type values. So Indiana tends to not lead, or they lead from behind, when it comes to societal norms. You know, gay marriage, for example, that was legalized. It took national rulings for Indiana to finally come along and say, okay, well, I guess we'll join. There was a lot of reluctance there. We still have a very, very watered down hate crimes bill in the state. We're one of only a handful of states in the United States that has a hate crimes bill, but it doesn't include gender. It doesn't include sexual orientation. Right. It follows a very rigid set of criteria, and they don't include several minority groups in it. So it's just a tough nut to crack. it's run by a super majority Republican conservative state legislature. And so a lot of these, I will just give you one example. I've been working with one of our local representatives to the state legislature about trying to get conversion therapy outlawed in Indiana.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't even get a hearing.
Wow.
It's not for lack of trying.
Mm.
And I'm in connection with a state senator and a state representative, and they're both trying their hardest, but it doesn't even get a hearing because the conservative group that controls the state legislature won't even bring it up. So that's kind of the obstacles that we face here.
That's what you're up against. Yeah.
Yes. Contrary to that, however, I suppose I could have come out in Chicago where nobody cares. And it wouldn't have been news, if you will. But because of my family circumstances and whatnot, I didn't come out until I came home to Muncie at 60 years old. I'm coming out. And so it could have been a disaster. And I feared the worst because there was a lot of people here that still knew me as Charles. And so now I'm coming back and I'm coming out as Charlize, and I just wasn't sure if this community was ready for it. But I badly misjudged this community. And
wow. Yeah.
Yes, I mean, you can count on easily one hand the number of bad experiences I've had. I mean, it's like one or two. And I just underestimated the love and the capacity to love and accept and affirm the people here in my hometown, and I regret that because they've been wonderful. Conservatives,
that's beautiful.
Liberals, everywhere in between, people have been wonderful to me, and I'm so grateful.
Wow, that's really lovely to hear. And I think it's also to do with as long as something is just theory, you can speak about people that are just like a theory, basically. That's one thing, and that's very detached. But as soon as you know a person and you get talking to a person, obviously the people you know and connect with, it says something about the connections in your hometown, I suppose, as
Absolutely.
well. Yeah.
Absolutely. I tell people, I really haven't changed as a person. I'm the same person. My exterior packaging changed.
Yeah.
And so, if you take the time to get to know an individual, what they look like really shouldn't matter. And so there's a whole lot of that going on here, not initiated by me, but initiated by the people. And I'm just truly grateful. I'm blessed. I have a family who loves me and supports me. I'm well aware of the fact that that's probably a minority story in many transgender individuals' lives. And for that, I'm very thankful. I've had it about as good as anyone could have it.
That's a beautiful thing. I think it just goes to show, no matter what the conservative sort of ruling of a place, it's still what matters is the people in, the local people, the connections you have. Yeah. That's what matters, right?
Yeah, people, we tend to fear what we don't understand.
Of course, yeah.
And there's the transphobic mentality that's out there is all rooted and based in fear. That there are still many people out there who view us as freak shows. And my goal is to normalize this, to be, act, look as typical as anyone else. And I hate to use the word normal because no one has yet been able to define for me what normal is, especially in 2021. So I try not to use that word, but when we're viewed and appreciated for who we are and what we possess in the way of either intelligence or ideas, then we know we've arrived. And so that's what I try to do, every day. I don't dwell on the 50 years that are gone. I can't do anything about that. So however long I have left, I just try to make the most out of each day.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you mentioned keyboard courage is a real problem on social media. People,
Yeah.
what I mean by that is that people can say and say some pretty mean and hateful things
Hmm.
because they're behind a screen,
Yeah,
and things that I honestly believe they wouldn't dare say to anyone's face. So
absolutely.
it's a hypocritical type of mentality, and that's the real
Hmm.
downside of social media.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. Hmm. Yeah, I love how you just seem to have embraced who you are and are just living a more authentic life. And what's that been like for you the last few years of doing that?
It's been wonderful. You know, now that COVID has, well, at least over here, it's improving, and
Hmm.
I'm fully vaccinated, and many other people here are as well. So we've relaxed some of our restrictions,
Hmm.
and now I'm going out to restaurants and things I haven't done in a little over a year. A lot of people are doing that now, and it feels
Yeah.
wonderful. And we still take precautions,
Hmm.
but I'm not cooped up in my house 24/7, and many others aren't either.
Hmm.
And just this past week, I've gone out to a real favorite restaurant bar here in town, and I've had drinks with friends I haven't seen in so long,
Hmm.
and in fact I'm doing so tonight. So I
Nice.
walk into places like that now. The head is up, the shoulders are back, and it's not in a haughty way, but it's you walk in kind of like you own the place, right?
Hmm.
Um, you don't slink in, try to sneak into a back corner somewhere where you're
Mm.
not seen. Nah, heck with that.
Mm.
It's own who you are, and
Hmm.
that's the mentality that I'm taking. And I maybe I'm just about to turn 66, so
Hmm.
you know maybe it comes with age and maturity and experience. But if somebody doesn't like me, or somebody thinks I'm a freak, or just
Mm.
can't handle me, that is not my problem. That is their problem.
So true.
And as long as I'm a decent human being and I try to treat people fairly and respectfully,
Mm.
then I'm doing what I should. I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing.
Hmm.
And they're the ones with the problem.
Yep.
So
Yep.
now I do want to add to this. I recognize that that's not always easy for somebody who's much younger.
Mm.
And many people come up to me and they say, "Well, oh, you're so brave to do what you've done." Well, let me tell you who I think is brave. Who
Hmm.
I think's brave are in 2021 are the 13-year-olds now who are rejected at home,
Mm.
bullied at school, not wanted at church, and teased by their friends.
Hmm.
And yet, despite all of that, they plod forward, and they're coming out, and they're wanting to be true to themselves. Those are brave kids right now, because
Hmm.
we can all remember back to when we were teenagers. It, those weren't the easiest of days on a good day. Now
Mm.
you throw transitioning, whether you're transgender or non-binary or however you identify,
Hmm.
um, that just adds to the difficulty. And yet
Mm.
these kids risk it all, and face it head on. Boy, they have my utmost respect, because I
Hmm.
waited. I waited until everything, when I had the least amount to risk as I could possibly have.
Hmm.
I didn't risk my career. I didn't risk my first marriage. Yeah, I didn't risk losing family members like my parents and things like that. Uh,
Mm.
my biggest worry was whether my kids would still love and accept me and my wife,
Hmm.
obviously. So I
Yeah.
waited. That's I consider it cowardice. But those kids today, they're brave.
Mm. Hmm. Yeah, that makes sense to look at it that way. But then the thing is, like, if you could have done so, I mean, those were such different times, weren't they? Yeah,
Much, much
yeah.
different. In
It's not
some
by no
ways,
means easy
it's
now, like
no,
you say.
yeah. In some ways, it was, yes, it's a lot different in many ways. In
Mm.
some ways, we still have a lot. There's still quite a bit of puritanical thinking,
Mm.
where we're ruled by I'll call it ancient biblical Old Testament type
Mm-hmm.
dogma and
Mm-hmm.
doctrine. And I'm saying this as a Christian. I am a Christian,
Mm-hmm.
and I believe that God makes all of us the way we are.
Mm-hmm.
And Psalm 139 is my favorite book of the Bible, verse of the Bible,
Mm-hmm.
because it talks about how we're all beautifully and wonderfully made by God.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't carry my religion on a sleeve, and I don't want to take over this interview with religion. But I just want to say that being transgender, being non-binary, being homosexual is not in any way inconsistent with being a Christian. And
Mm.
and so I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, I love that because I guess people just interpret the writing in different ways, don't they?
They do.
Because some people are rejecting of those identities and other people are accepting of it, because I know Christians who are, very, very accepting of it, and I also know some that are not. So yeah. Yeah.
There are scripture passages in the Bible that you can pluck out of the context and say, here,
Mm.
and make it say what you want it to do. But I don't
Mm.
think that's what God intended us to do, is to take scripture and then twist it around and to use it against someone else. That's not the intent.
Well, I mean, if it doesn't come from love, then it's untrue, isn't it? Really,
Yeah,
if you think about it, because that's
it
the
is.
root of it all.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. You know, I don't I don't believe I've seen any verse in the Bible where Jesus condemned homosexuality. There's
Mm-hmm.
places in the Old Testament where the law condemned it, but I've never
Mm.
seen anything where Jesus said that. Jesus talked about loving your neighbor.
Mm-hmm.
God said the greatest commandment there is to love your neighbor as yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the two greatest commandments.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess if you're condoning hate onto someone else and using the Bible to do it, I just think they're doing it wrong.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, absolutely. So, how have your children been with your transitioning?
Okay, this is another long answer, but it's funny. It
That's
has a funny
fine.
ending.
Yeah.
So my three children could not be more different. My two oldest are from my first marriage,
Mm-hmm.
and my oldest daughter is, I'd say, more conservative than but
Mm-hmm.
she's not what I'd call an obnoxious conservative at all. And her mother is very conservative Christian,
Mm-hmm.
and so my oldest daughter, who is now, oh gosh, 37. Yeah, 37. Oh man,
Wow.
as you
Yeah.
age, the mental part gets a little fuzzy. But um, but I knew that I would have to talk to each of them in a unique way, and I wanted to do
Mm.
so one on one. So we didn't have any group meetings, and this was to come out to them.
Mm-hmm.
And these are the days that I dreaded the most, because I thought I can't lose any one of them.
Mm.
So I went in order of age, and I started with my oldest daughter, and we had she's very to the point, doesn't talk a lot like me. And she simply said, after I told her, she says, well, can I still call you Dad? And I said, yeah, you can still call me Dad. I'm certainly not Mom. I didn't give birth to you.
Yeah.
And she says, well, Dad, I just want you to know that I love you no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
And if she was the one I was the most concerned with, I
Mm.
could just tell you there was 1,000-pound weight just lifted off my shoulders in that moment. It was just
Mm.
music to my ears. It was very short, very sweet,
Mm-hmm.
but boy, that's just what I wanted to hear. And my
Beautiful.
son, my son, who's more liberal than I am, I think, and he's just on the other spectrum. I talked to him, and he's very affirming of LGBTQ. He's married to a woman,
Mm-hmm.
but they're very, very, both of them, very supportive. But my concern was, and yet I'm still Dad. And how's he? He's one thing to be very supportive of others.
Mm.
It's another to be, how supportive are you going to be if it's your father, right?
Mm.
And so I told him, and he was fine with it. He's
Mm-hmm.
fine. I got you. I got you back. And so then we get to my then 17-year-old. I told her,
Mm-hmm.
and she's just so precious. And again, special needs, and her area is developmental. She
Mm-hmm.
gets it. It just takes her a little longer than others, but
Mm-hmm.
she'll get it. But she has a very simple outlook in life. So I was picking her up at her then boyfriend's home, and was taking her home. And I thought, I'm just going to tell her now. So I said, look, I've got something I want to talk to you about. She says, okay, what is it? And I said, well, Daddy's transgender. And trust me, kids in high school know exactly what that is. We
Mm-hmm.
may not have in school, but they know exactly what that is.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I'm going to transition to a woman. And she goes, oh, that's cool. Can we stop and get tacos for dinner? And I, I was ready for, a million questions,
Mm-hmm.
and it was, no, you want transition? That's fine. I want tacos. So let's go. So we went to the taco place and we got tacos and went home, and that was that. I mean, it was just, it was just not a big deal to her.
It's kind of a gift to see things in simple ways, isn't it? When you
It
think
is.
about it. Yeah.
It is, but it isn't just the special needs. It's
Mm.
the age difference.
Yeah.
There's a generation gap between my oldest daughter and my youngest daughter,
Mm.
and in how they view things and accept things in the world. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what gives me hope about, the youth of today from an acceptance standpoint and an affirmation standpoint.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess
So
that the younger generation are less conditioned and socialized, and they grow up with very
yeah,
different, ideas. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
they
Which
they
is
very
helpful.
much are. Yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking about you. You said obviously you started transitioning when you had been together with your wife for a long time. What do you think was it that made her accepting, not accepting of it, because that sounds like all wrong, but what do you think helped her, come to terms with such a change in you?
Yeah. Well, let me start by saying that denial is a very strong thing.
Mm-hmm.
And this is 2012. I
Mm-hmm.
was I was still employed. I was traveling, and in the Chicago area, and it's such a large area that from my home to the office where they wanted me to go, like 2 3 times days a week, was 2 hours one way.
Wow.
And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and I said, well, I don't mind going up there, but I'm not driving 4 hours round trip and working 8 10 hours a day. And so they said, okay, and they put me up in a motel. Well, I had started to purchase some women's clothing,
Mm-hmm.
and I took the opportunity, and this is where things were really coming and building to a head here.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I would go into the office at 8 o'clock in the morning as Charles, dressed as a man,
Mm-hmm.
and when I got back to the motel from like 5 o'clock on, I would turn into Charlize. I
Mm-hmm.
had a wig. Oh, it was ugly, but I had one. And I, I had just a couple of items of clothing and some shoes,
Mm-hmm.
and it didn't matter to me because I
Mm-hmm.
stayed in Charlize mode until about 7 o'clock the next morning, and then I'd get up and change back in, wipe off the makeup, change back into Charles for the workday,
Mm-hmm.
and I do that 2 3 times, a week.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got to the point where I'd get brave enough that I'd even, when I'd leave and drive home, I would drive home as Charlize, and then I'd find a safe place to change my clothes before I got home.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had these bags. When I travel, I had 3 bags. I had a bag of men's clothing,
Mm-hmm.
I had a suitcase of women's clothing, and a third bag with women's shoes.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd drag 3 bags into the hotel, and I would leave them in the back of our SUV.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they were always there. And of course, I'd bring them in and they'd get washed, and then I'd put them back in the bag. And my wife knew what was in those bags. She knew.
Mm-hmm.
but just it wasn't something that I think at that time either one of us wanted to discuss.
Wow.
And so it was just there. And I remember we'd go on vacation, and my wife is from the state of Maine. And so it's 1,200-mile drive, and we love to drive it. And so she'd come to me right as we're getting ready to pack. She says, "You got to get your crap out of the back of that car because we need room for all of our other stuff."
Hmm.
So I mean, she knew
Yeah.
what was in there,
Uh-huh.
but I think she thought that I was like cross dressing or.
Hmm.
And there's not a thing wrong with cross dressing. There's a lot of cross
Hmm.
dressers or drag queens, and they're that's absolutely fine. There's room in this world for everybody.
Hmm.
But that's not really who I am.
Hmm.
And so I finally had to come out and tell her. And so there were already several dots being connected along the way between say 2012 and 2015.
Hmm.
And so it couldn't have been a huge surprise. And
Hmm.
yet to hear me say the words was difficult.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah, you don't just wake up one morning and say, "I'm going to be transgender," and start dressing as the opposite sex that you've been dressing as all of these years. It's a
Mm.
it's a process,
Hmm.
and you have to be first comfortable with it to yourself
Totally.
in order to progress. And I
Mm.
had 50 years of thinking about it, so I was more than ready.
I was going to say, I guess you were pretty sure by that point, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Interesting. I wondered it when you were sort of saying all that. I wondered if she maybe, you mentioned denial, and then I was thinking, well, maybe she was just waiting for you to speak up about it, I suppose, rather than say, those clothes in your car. Do you know what I mean? That suitcase.
we we had an incredible lack of curiosity going on for a few years in our house.
Right.
It was just there. She knew it was there. I knew it was there, and
Hmm.
we just we
Yeah.
just didn't we just didn't talk about it.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
Uh,
it's great that that you all managed to move forward together,
yeah.
in a
Yeah. We
positive
have.
way.
No,
Yeah.
I'm sure if you asked her today, she would prefer to have her husband back. In fact, I'm certain of that because
Okay.
this fundamentally changes a marriage.
Hmm.
And you can probably let your mind wander and figure out how and where. But it does.
Hmm.
It doesn't change whether you love someone.
Yeah.
If you love the person, we're back to this exterior packaging, right? You love the
Hmm.
person on the inside.
Yeah.
That really doesn't change. But there are aspects of marriage where it does change, and but we're committed to each other, and we're committed to our daughter,
Hmm.
and so that's most important to us right now.
Mm. Yeah. 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 It's interesting what you were saying about how focused we are on the package, like the exterior and the looks and the presentation of us, and how when it doesn't conform to certain, I don't know, societal rules, then people
Yeah.
object to it. But it's kind of a weird concept for me when you think about it that way.
But over in the UK, I don't know.
Mm,
I presume your advertising is similar to here in the States.
I
But
guess.
here in the States, we are
Mm-hmm.
bombarded with plastic surgery, with the insatiable desire to be thin.
Mm-hmm.
You look at over here anyway, the mannequins in stores and such. They're finally getting to be fuller figure mannequins over here. It's like the
That's good.
it's like the clothing designers woke up one morning and suddenly realized there were people with little extra on their bodies.
Mm,
We're not all size zero, and
yeah.
I'm many numbers away from zero. But that's why we feel that way because we're
Hmm.
bombarded. The cosmetic industry, and I don't mean just
Totally.
makeup, but just personal cosmetic, personal looks. That's multi-billion-dollar business, and it's what everybody tends to focus on. And hey, I have days where I have a horrible self-image, and I look in the mirror and I see nothing but flaws.
Hmm.
And I also know that if I wanted to spend a few $1,000s, there's some plastic surgeon somewhere that could take care of all that for me. But
Yeah.
it's just that's why we feel that way, because we're bombarded
Totally.
by it.
Yeah, well, that's the same, I think, here. It's very ingrained, though. I mean, I grew up with those kind of ideas, and even before, I think it was all about, Instagram perfection and cosmetic surgery and stuff. It is like, especially women, we're conditioned to look a certain way and look young, and there's all this pressure about being a certain shape and size. That is a thing. And when you were just saying all those things, I was thinking of this meme I saw a while back that said, if women suddenly just loved and accepted themselves and their bodies for what they are, imagine how many companies and industries would go out of business.
Absolutely.
And that is so true, right?
Absolutely. And then in society, there's also, and having been on both sides of the gender fence here, and lived most of my life as a man, and I know I've heard other, hung out with guys. I hear how they talk and stuff. Not all of them, but some.
Yeah.
And it's like, when they're defining how a woman needs to look, they're defining this stereotypical perfected look. And you sit there and you look at them and you say, you're thinking to yourself, have you looked in the mirror lately? Because, I mean, what they're describing that they want in a date or a wife or whatever is the exact opposite of how they look. It's like guys get a pass sometimes. So I don't know how it is over there, but there's just a whole lot of that kind of thing that I think is gradually going away. It's going to take time, but we're finally coming to the realization that not everybody, like I said, is a size 0, or not every man has a 32 waist. It's just
I mean,
I think very few do. From what I've seen.
I mean that this not necessarily just the stereotypes, but like the perfected, sculpted visuals of people, for men and women, just to be binary about it for a second. They've all got their rules and regulations and like what we should look like.
You can't see them, but behind my glasses, I have like a full set of Samsonite luggage hanging under my eyes. I mean, there's just a lot. There's so many bags. It's like you can tell the age of trees by how many rings. You can tell how old I am by counting the ruffles under my eyes. It's So what? I'm not going to do anything about that. The only surgery, and maybe we need to touch on this. I have not had any surgery whatsoever. I intend to have at some point breast augmentation surgery. I do want that because I do want to fill out my look as best as I can and feel the best that I can about myself.
Yeah.
And I've been on estrogen now almost 3 years.
Okay.
And that's helping, but I need a little more help. Yeah. And so I think I'm going to do that. As for any other surgery, like further south, I don't intend to do that at this point. I'm 66. I'm in a committed relationship. What would be the gain for me to get rid of a penis and have a vagina? I mean, I don't know. It just doesn't seem like it would be cost effective and needed at this point. So I probably won't. If I was 35 instead of 65, I probably would feel differently. But at this stage, I don't see that happening.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being so open about that. Yeah, that's fair. Each to their own about that. Yeah.
Yep.
So how are you spending your retirement? What are you doing?
Well, I have. I took a couple of. Well, I guess I've been retired a couple of years. Much of that time I took doing nothing. I had a very stressful career. I worked in retail, and I was in store management for 20 years or so, and then close to 10 in IT management. And I can tell you, in both of those careers and over those nearly 30 years, it was very high stress and high visibility. And
Mm.
so part of the way I was able to take focus off of my being transgender is I became workaholic, and I would
Mm.
work many, many long hours. And trust me, both the retail industry and the IT industry will take every hour you're willing to give them
Mm.
over and above the minimum. And that's what I did. I don't recommend coping with major life changes that way, but it's what I did and felt I
Mm.
had to do. So after in the last roughly 10 years, we're in corporate headquarters, and so that just added to the visibility and all. And I didn't feel like I could come out because I felt like I'd be risking losing everything. You know, my career.
Mm.
We
Mm.
had bills to pay, a mortgage. I had mouths to feed that depended upon me.
Yeah.
It's just too much at risk.
Mm-hmm.
But when I retired and I started transitioning, I wanted to find ways to whatever I wanted to do, I wanted to enjoy it. And I found two great ways. One is through the human library.
Mm-hmm.
And for those who may not know what that is, it's like going into a library and checking out a book, except you're going into a building or a Zoom meeting and you're checking out a topic. And the book is a human being that maybe lives on the margins a little bit or
Mm-hmm.
has a non-typical story, and people can learn from that. And
Mm-hmm.
I have been blessed. I found out about it and I immediately said yes, I'd like to do it, and
Awesome.
it's been wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah.
The other one is more local. It's our local United Way, and they have it's a nonprofit organization in the States,
Mm-hmm.
and they have a program here locally called Muncie Reads, and they have volunteers in the community that read books to elementary school kids,
Oh,
and it's to encourage reading. And so I
nice.
did that, and there was a second grade class here at an elementary school locally that, because of COVID, I had to do this through Zoom interviews and
Mm-hmm.
videos. But during the school year, school year here just ended,
Mm-hmm.
and or is about to end, and so I would do a Zoom video, and I'd read a second grade level book, and they would see the video, and it was interaction that way. Very rewarding and fun.
Mm.
I mean, these
Yeah.
little tykes, getting to read to them, and it also,
Amazing.
yeah, well, and having a transgender person do that was a bit of a trailblazing thing here in
Mm.
town.
I bet.
So yeah,
Yeah.
as
That's
far as I
amazing.
know, there was no fallout from doing
Mm-hmm.
that. And
Mm-hmm.
I asked everybody before we start, let's find out if there's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to find out after we start. So
That's fair. Yeah. Yeah.
no problems. It's wonderful.
Mm. That's
That's how I
beautiful.
spend my time. That and
Yeah, that's lovely. Yes, I mean I'm familiar with the Human Library as well, and
mhm.
yeah. So how has the Human Library in particular helped you? Has it helped you in your, I don't know, expression or your giving how you feel a voice or anything like that?
Well, personally, it's we all of us that have a story, and I think we all have a story. We
Totally.
create what we call our elevator speech, which is
Yes.
the you know here's the 30,000 foot level of what I'm about,
Yeah.
and it's forced us to come up with one of those.
Mm-hmm.
But this is a great opportunity to share, and while my very first event was in person,
Mm-hmm.
actually my first two events were in person before COVID hit.
Mm-hmm.
It was wonderful sitting down, meeting with total strangers, and they felt comfortable enough to ask me questions, and I felt comfortable enough to answer them.
Yeah.
And one of them was here locally, and the other one was over at Purdue University, and it was in Lafayette, Indiana, both of them Indiana. And then COVID hit, and then we had to move to Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
But Zoom, if there was a silver lining to COVID, Zoom introduced me to so many people all around the world,
Mm.
and I was able to share my not only my story but everybody else in Human Library shared
Mm-hmm.
their story with, I mean, people in North Macedonia, people in Copenhagen, the UK, Canada, United States, all over.
Mm-hmm.
And, what a great opportunity that was to have it.
Mm.
And, really we can owe that to COVID.
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely changed, well, some things in a positive way as well. Yeah.
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 And it's nice to
So,
have those options now as well, like moving forward, even to keep the in person, like bringing
yeah.
the in person meetings back again, but also you can still do them online because
Yeah,
it's a very different way of connecting with people. Yeah.
absolutely. So, an hour of Zoom pretty much does me in, but
It's
uh,
tiring, isn't it?
yeah,
Yeah.
it's a whole different feel
Mm.
than
Mm-hmm.
in person.
Yeah.
But I enjoy it. I enjoy
Mm.
it, and I try to sign up for as many human library sessions as I can.
Amazing.
And it's
Yeah.
fun to tell your story. It's fun to hear others. I will share one event. This was a
Mm.
face-to-face event
Mm-hmm.
over in Purdue University,
Mm-hmm.
and I was sitting at a table, and there was a long line of people that had come in for the event, and
Mm-hmm.
there was a board up on there that had all the list of topics of books
Mm-hmm.
that they could check out.
Yeah.
And this woman comes over to my table, and I stand up to greet her, and she leans in on the table, and she doesn't shake my hand or anything. She just leans in on the table and looks very kind of sternly at me, and she says, "Before we get started, I just want you to know I'm a conservative Christian." And I kind of took me aback. I thought, well, okay. I mean, and I just responded. I said, well, I'm a liberal Christian, so let's sit down and talk.
Mm-hmm.
And they have timekeepers in Human Library. They wanted to
Yeah.
keep the sessions to like 20 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you can probably tell from this interview that anything 20 minutes is hard for me to. but, but this particular person, this woman was. I mean, we started having great conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And the timekeeper comes over and I shoot her away. I said, no, we need more time.
Yeah.
And she came over like 2 or 3 more times. I kept shooing her off.
Yeah.
I was with that woman close to an hour.
Mm-hmm.
And she got up and, I don't know that I didn't change her core beliefs. She
Mm-hmm.
didn't change my core beliefs. But she came away, I think, from that session with a different heart as
Mm.
it relates to gender identity and
Yeah.
LGBTQ in general.
Mm-hmm.
And she gave me this, what started as no handshake and just a stern look,
Mm.
ended in a big bear hug. And,
Oh.
so, I left, she left, walked away, and I sat down and I thought, you know what, that right there is what the human library is all about. That
Absolutely.
is it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing. Like once you have this like concepts of gender and gender identities, they're all very fuzzy and it's all very out there until you meet an actual person and have a conversation with them, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And
Yeah.
and there's still a lot of people. In fact, I read about something or heard it on the news. That there's still quite a few people out there that consider gender to be a two thing option, a two
Mm.
gender option, male or female.
Yeah.
Oh, that couldn't be more wrong.
Totally.
Uh,
And they argue that it's to do with biology, but that's
yeah,
also not true. I had a conversation with someone called Tara, who is a biologist, and they told me about something called bimodal distribution, and that's like the way sex is not just a bar graph, like one bar with female and one bar with male, but it's
right.
like there's a wave, that goes up, and that's female, and then it goes down a bit in the middle, and that's where intersex comes in as well, and
Yeah,
then it goes up again for male. Yeah, so it's very nuanced, and it's like a gradient rather than just separate bars of a graph. Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And gender, gender is so much more than. I'll be a little crude here.
Mm.
Um, so much more than what's between one's legs.
Mm. Yeah.
What's up here in the head, what's in the heart, what's in the soul,
Mm.
just as much part of
Totally.
gender
Yeah.
and how you're wired,
Yeah. Yeah.
inside
Mm-hmm.
is just as much part of gender as your genitalia. And
Mm.
it's hard for some people to wrap their head around that,
Mm.
but more and more are. And I will tell you, the physicians that have letters after their names, the physicians that have treated me, nurses that have treated me, therapists who treat me, every single one of them to a person believes that this is how I was born.
Mm-hmm.
I believe this is how I was born.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just taken a little longer for me to get there than many others. So I follow science. I follow the doctors. And
Mm-hmm.
whether we're talking about transitioning or COVID,
Mm.
I follow the science and the doctors, and I know how I feel.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, beautiful. Is there anything you'd like to add that we haven't talked about yet?
all your listeners are probably saying, "Oh, please no." We just need to get to a point where everybody in this world feels safe, secure, to be themselves, to
Mm-hmm.
be authentic and live authentically.
Mm-hmm.
In many ways, I felt like I lived a dual existence, and it is so not healthy. And to those 13-year-olds that are out there that are questioning their own identity, don't wait 50 years.
Mm.
Don't do that. Be honest with your family. Be honest with yourself. And I'm the best example of what not to do in that regard. Now, having said that, I'm going to also say I have no regrets, because
Mm-hmm.
when someone says, "Do you have regrets?" and if I said yes, it's selfishly speaking, yeah, maybe there are a few.
Mm-hmm.
But I wouldn't have had 3 beautiful kids. I wouldn't have married 2 wonderful women.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't still be married to one.
Mm-hmm.
And, there are so many joys in life that I experienced over 65 years
Mm.
that I wouldn't have experienced and enjoyed had
Absolutely.
I not chosen this path. But be true and
Yeah.
be authentic. That's what I would say to the 13-year-olds of today.
Mm.
It's a little
Walk your own
easier.
path. Yeah.
The path is a little easier out there, and its path is wider. You don't have to follow some narrow path that somebody else dictated for you.
Absolutely. Walk your own. Make your own, I guess. Yeah. If it's not there already, make it yourself. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing your story.
I thank you for inviting me on, and I hope it helps someone.
I'm sure it would. Yeah.
But I love the opportunities to share this, because that in the human library, this is how we knock down walls of prejudice.
Absolutely.
And,
yes.
One person at a time.
Amen to that, huh?
Thank you so much.
Thank you. You can find out more details on the website at 50shadesofgender.com/Charlize, where you can also read the transcript. Thank you for listening to the 50 Shades of Gender podcast. You can find us online at 50shadesofgender.com and on social media. If you'd like to support us, please consider becoming a patron on Patreon. Plans start from only $1 a month. Visit patreon.com/50 Shades of Gender for more details. We hope you will listen again. Until then, stay curious and open-minded. I was just having a look at my little list here.
Certainly, I've covered everything, right?
You pretty much have, yeah.
I mean, I've just talked to everybody's ear off, I think.
That's all good.
Well, I'm cutting into your dinner time, I think, and
yeah, it's getting close. It's getting close.
Yeah.
I'm not quite hungry yet, but I'll get there in a minute, I think. Yeah.
Well, you've got a lot of editing to do here.
I do. Well, not a lot, just a little bit.